I'm Joan Carver. I retired from Jacksonville University as professor of political science, and one of my interests when I was there was research on urban government. And that was probably sparked by the fact that our city consolidated in 1967, or 68 it went into effect. And that was a very unusual happening for Jacksonville and in the nation.
And as you look back on it, how do you think it has worked?
It's worked well, but not as well as people anticipated. It improved efficiency, it improved coordination, but it didn't transform the political culture. Now, it had a political culture effect immediately. That is, we got new elected officials, there was a kind of enthusiasm about government. The media covered government a lot. People thought about it. But that changed with time. Some of the enthusiasm vanished. The recruitment of top-level people into government vanished to some degree. And the media stopped covering city government very much.
Is Jacksonville a better place because of consolidation?
I don't know that I would say it's better. It's probably more efficient. And it costs probably less than it would if we still had all those officials. But being better involves a sense of community, willingness to maybe tax yourself for the city and for improvements. And Jacksonville has traditionally had a low tax mentality, and that didn't change with consolidation.
As you look at it now almost 50 years later, are there things that you think would have made it better?
I think it would have been better if they had thought of some way to maintain greater responsiveness. Maybe neighborhood groups, because the big problem for consolidated government is making people feel like they're a part of it, that they're not just a small cog. And that's one of the things that causes resistance. There was an expectation that the beaches would want to come in soon, but the beaches haven't wanted to come in soon. They're sort of in and out. Responsiveness is one of the things you may lose with the efficiency of consolidation. I think it is more efficient. I think there are other things we could do to strengthen it, like having perhaps some neighborhood government options, changes that might improve. I don't know, the city, they've looked at the city council a number of times, tried to decide whether it would be better with more representatives or less, and never come to any conclusion on that, but that's something that might be considered again.
Is it possible that expectations were unrealistically high?
Probably. You had a whole white hat movement. You know, that's what they call the people for it. The media was for it. The Chamber of Commerce was for it. They tried to sell it as changing everything. So I think we were a little unrealistic in what we expected. It improved things, but it wasn't a panacea for all our problems.
And is it possible that some of the critique of consolidation now, 50 years later, is dissatisfaction with the people who have run the government, not the form of government? The politicians.
Perhaps, but one of the things that's happened is that growth has changed too. Now we have almost as much of Jacksonville outside Jacksonville's boundaries in the other counties, so how do we deal with that? That's the same problem we had before we consolidated. But I do think it's probably we're always sort of critical of the government that's in power.
And how do you account for the vote in August 1967 was pretty overwhelming for this new radical kind of government that had not been tried very often anywhere.
Well, that's true. I think it surprised a lot of people because votes on annexation prior to that had lost. But we had a mix of circumstances that you could call specifically very favorable, not good not good circumstances, but circumstances that helped get that consolidation passed. So many city officials were corrupt and were indicted. The river was polluted. The schools were discredited. There was a lot of bad things going on that people wanted to see changed. And we also didn't have what some cities have, is a lot of incorporated communities outside of Jacksonville. The area was unincorporated. So all those situations, I think, made it easier to get the vote through. Sort of like, well, it's so bad now, how could it be worse?
It is true, I guess, that not a whole lot of other places have done it. Why do you think that is?
Not very many. We thought there would be just a great number that would follow our example, but that didn't happen. A few in Alaska, but those are little tiny cities, some in Georgia. I think Tallahassee is thinking about it again. They've thought about it a lot of times, but not many cities have consolidated. I think it's because people really are interested in having government responsive to them, and they're afraid if it consolidates, they'll lose some of that responsiveness. And they may be afraid that it may cost them more, even though it's more efficient and should cost less.
Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think it's a good experiment, and I think we can still work on the edges and improve it some. I'd like to see the media cover it more again, because I think that would increase citizen interest and responsiveness of officials. So I think that's it.
Thank you. Joan Carver.
You're welcome.
Could we get Joan maybe to, because something that a word that she uses a lot, and I'm just trying to think of people who will see the video, but who are not as educated as you, perhaps. Could you talk more about what it means to have a responsive government? Like perhaps compare and contrast a government example that's very responsive versus one that's not, and what that would mean for just a citizen.
Well, for citizens,
Do you want to direct this just to Harry?
often a small government seems more responsive because it's easy to get to. If you take Atlantic Beach, it's just a little community. You can go down to the city commission meetings and say what you want to say. You can call them up and get a response. And that's not so true in the big city. I mean, you can go to the city council meeting, but that's downtown, it's televised. People are probably, in many cases, reluctant to do that. So being responsive, so if you have a big government like Jacksonville, you've got to figure out some ways to make it easy for people to feel like they're connected. Perhaps with their city commission, city councilman, perhaps with neighborhood meetings, and I know some councilmen do have neighborhood meetings. And that may help that feeling, because it is a big community, bigger than most cities in terms of being able to respond to what the people want.
And what would you say is the biggest, what do you think Jacksonville maybe would look like if we, were to stay with the consolidated government? What would you think it will look like, say, in another 50 years? What would you project?
With no changes? With no changes, we're going to be increasingly surrounded by affluent suburbs that come to the city, and their people work here, but they don't contribute to the taxes. So they would have to figure out some way, maybe a commuter tax, as some cities have had, in order to have the areas around it pay their fair share. Also, you won't have much planning unless you have a regional planning commission. If you have all this growth going on in Clay County and St. Johns County and Nassau County outside of the boundaries of Duval County. So consolidation worked well when we did it, but lots of growth has occurred outside of Jacksonville now. I think there are as many people, I think, outside of Jacksonville, down the metropolitan area, as there are in it now. When you take the big metropolitan area. So that poses the same kind of problems for the community that the division of the growth outside of the city posed when we consolidated.